In 1982, director David Lynch was having lunch at a studio commissary in Mexico City, deep into preparations for his ambitious film Dune, when a gaunt, pale stranger approached. The man had intense blue eyes and a polite confidence. He introduced himself as an actor who loved Frank Herbert's novel and inquired if any role might still be available. Lynch was startled, as though he'd seen a ghost. He quickly gathered himself and apologized. Only later did Lynch confess to his new hire why he'd looked so shaken during that uncanny lunch moment. "I thought you were dead." The stranger was Dean Stockwell, and by his own account, he wasn't offended. In fact, he knew many people in Hollywood assumed he had vanished for good. Stockwell had, by middle age, effectively fallen off the map, disappearing from show business for years at a time, and many assumed that he hadn't just disappeared from Hollywood, but from life itself. But how did this intense and brilliant actor manage to make the quantum leap from being both alive and dead to being back on the silver screen again? Welcome to Hollywood Mysteries. Dean Stockwell was born Robert Dean Stockwell on March 5, 1936 in North Hollywood, Los Angeles. With that address, he was practically destined for show business. His father, Harry Stockwell, was a baritone singer and stage actor best known as the voice of Prince Charming in Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. His mother, Nina Olivet, born Elizabeth Veronica, was an actress and comedian in vaudeville. Entertainment was the family business. Dean was the second of two sons. His older brother, Guy Stockwell, would also become an actor. When Dean was only 7 years old, both brothers were cast in a Broadway play called Innocent Voyage, and a Hollywood talent scout spotted little Dean's performance. MGM offered the child a contract, and soon the boy was enrolled in the studio's Little Red Schoolhouse alongside other budding stars like Elizabeth Taylor. He made his film debut at age 9, and by 10, he was supporting his entire family with his earnings. In those days, the studio system groomed child actors intensively. Stockwell quickly became one of MGM's most prized young players of the 1940s, appearing in some 24 films before he was out of his teens. He wasn't just doing bit parts or cute cameos. He played substantial roles that often carried the emotional weight of a film. In Anchors Away from 1945, a big-budget musical starring Gene Kelly and Frank Sinatra, 8-year-old Dean played a runaway orphan who sings with Sinatra and does a solid job tugging at audiences' heartstrings. In Elia Kazan's acclaimed 1947 drama about anti-Semitism, Gentleman's Agreement, Dean had a key supporting role as Gregory Peck's inquisitive son. This was a performance that earned him a special Juvenile Golden Globe Award. In 1950, he co-starred with Errol Flynn in Kim, holding his own as a streetwise young hero of Rudyard Kipling's adventure tale. In Joseph Losey's anti-war fable, The Boy with Green Hair, 12-year-old Dean carried the film in the title role, playing a war orphan whose hair inexplicably turns bright green as a statement against intolerance. These were not simple, cutesy kid roles. They demanded genuine acting technique and a depth of feeling rare in one so young. He had a soulful, searching quality on screen, with wide eyes that could brim with tears on cue. Studio executives, noting how effectively Stockwell could cry, weren't shy about exploiting that talent. In fact, Dean remembered being told by Elia Kazan to think of a puppy dying just before a take, which was a somewhat traumatizing but effective approach. His youthful face soon became synonymous with Hollywood pathos. Off-screen, however, the boy found the experience far from magical. Extreme psychological and emotional pressure is how Dean later described his childhood career. He was essentially treated as a pint-sized adult on set, expected to deliver professional results without regard to his age. Decades later, he recalled the ordeal vividly. "A lot of demands were placed on me that should not be placed on a child, at all, ever. I resented the whole thing," he said, noting how he dreaded the swarms of fans and reporters that would mob him after a day's work. Dean later admitted he actively sabotaged his own adolescent image in hopes of escaping Hollywood's clutches. I couldn't wait to get pimples. I couldn't wait to get awkward, he said of his teen years, explaining how he longed for a normal life. I ruined my posture. I did everything just to get out of it. When his 7-year MGM contract finally ended in 1953, 16-year-old Dean did something astonishing. He walked away. At the height of his juvenile stardom, he simply quit acting. He hadn't had anything resembling a real childhood or adolescence. Now he intended to reclaim it. Stockwell later referred to this as his first great disappearance, and he didn't do it halfway. He vanished so completely that even his appearance changed. The teenager cut off his trademark tousled curls, enrolled in a regular high school, and even briefly attended the University of California, Berkeley. Unsurprisingly, academia did not stick. He dropped out of Berkeley after a short stint. Instead, the restless youth spent roughly 5 years roaming the country, taking odd jobs and enjoying the freedom he had never known. In later interviews, Stockwell described those mid-1950s wanderings as an attempt to live life on his own terms, hitchhiking, doing manual labor, or disappearing into the countryside to live and work under a pseudonym. For a time, the former movie star pumped gas at a filling station without anyone realizing who he was. Hollywood had been a prison sentence for his youth, he said, and now he was finally paroled. Before I get into the harsh reality of Dean's new life, I'd like to take a moment to remind you all that I have launched an exciting new series over on Patreon and in the YouTube members area, audio versions of Hollywood histories. Every week I'll be uploading an audio-only episode of around 10 minutes for you to enjoy once you are subscribed to the Hollywood Histories tier. And our members here on YouTube will get exactly the same content by clicking the join button below this video. I'll be covering a wide variety of Hollywood-related stories, from silent movie scandals to the lives of lesser-known actors, to disastrous productions and much more. Higher tiers get early access to videos and other perks, even including being able to request a full Hollywood Mysteries episode on your favorite star. So if you'd like to help Hollywood Mysteries thrive, please take a look at what's on offer over on Patreon and in the members area. I'll put a link on screen now so you can check out the perks and decide for yourself. And I'd like to say welcome to all the new supporters both here on YouTube and on Patreon. And of course, a huge thanks to those who have been pitching in for a while now. And now let's get back to the rise and fall and rise again of Dean Stockwell. This act of teenage rebellion came with a hard reality. By his early 20s, Stockwell discovered that life outside of Hollywood could be just as tough. He had no other trade to fall back on. After a few years of drifting, the pragmatic conclusion set in. There was nothing else I could do except act, he said. Acting, the very thing he had resented, was also the craft he knew best. So by 1957, still only 21 but already a film veteran, Dean cautiously returned to his profession. On his own terms this time. He moved to New York to do theater, a world away from MGM's tight control. To his surprise, he quickly found himself in demand again. Stockwell landed a leading role on Broadway in Compulsion, a psychological crime drama based on the infamous Leopold and Loeb murder case. When Compulsion was adapted into a feature film in 1959, Stockwell reprised his role on screen, acting alongside Orson Welles. The film was well received, and at the Cannes Film Festival, Dean shared the Best Actor prize with his co-star Welles and Bradford Dillman, a prestigious honor that signaled his adult career was off to a promising restart. By the early 1960s, Dean Stockwell had seemingly beaten the child star curse. No longer the cherubic MGM boy, he had matured into a handsome young man with dark, brooding features, often compared to contemporary sensitive actors like Montgomery Clift or James Dean. Stockwell's performances in this era showed a depth and complexity that transcended the usual leading man fare. In Jack Cardiff's lush 1960 adaptation of D.H. Lawrence's Sons and Lovers, he played an aspiring artist grappling with love and family. The film earned 7 Oscar nominations and further proved Stockwell's dramatic chops. In Sidney Lumet's acclaimed film of Eugene O'Neill's Long Day's Journey into Night, Dean delivered a haunting turn as Edmund Tyrone, the consumptive, soul-searching son in a tortured family, acting alongside Katharine Hepburn, Ralph Richardson, and Jason Robards. Again, Cannes honored him with the Best Actor award, shared with his ensemble for that performance. By age 26, Dean had 2 Cannes trophies to his name and the kind of critical respect that few former child actors ever attain. On the surface, it looked as though Dean was poised for a long, stable career as a leading man. In reality, he was growing deeply disillusioned once again. The youthful angst that had driven him out of Hollywood at 16 was still there, now sharpened by adult consciousness. He struggled with his own psyche and sense of identity. Fame and success hadn't brought contentment. If anything, the acclaim made him uneasy. Friends noted that Dean carried a certain ambivalence about acting, a love-hate relationship with his craft that would persist throughout his life. After the intensive work of Long Day's Journey, his behavior turned erratic. He'd married actress Millie Perkins, best known for The Diary of Anne Frank, in 1960. But the young marriage was tempestuous and short-lived. They divorced after 2 years, with Perkins citing mental cruelty and emotional turmoil on Stockwell's part. Stockwell, despite his professional success, was wrestling personal demons. Those demons would arise in an infamous episode of symbolic self-sabotage that shocked the entire film industry. He destroyed his Cannes Film Festival awards in a drunken rage, tossing the prize trophies into a fireplace in an act of anger and self-loathing. It was as if he couldn't allow himself to enjoy success for long before violently rejecting it. In 1965, at just 29 years old, Dean Stockwell walked away from acting again. This time, it wasn't an adolescent fleeing a studio contract, but a disillusioned young man rejecting the Hollywood rat race at the moment of his early prime. The mid-1960s were convulsing with social change, and Dean felt the pull of the era's counterculture currents. He had missed out on a normal youth. Now, as the world seemed to turn upside down, he saw a chance to experience the carefree, lost childhood he never had. The flower children and the love-ins were the childhood I didn't have, he reflected later. So he made what seemed the obvious choice for a restless soul of the time. He moved to California's bohemian enclaves and became, in effect, a hippie. Stockwell dove headlong into the social and sexual revolution then roiling American culture. In Topanga Canyon and Haight-Ashbury, he fraternized with the era's artists, musicians, and dropouts. The one-time MGM poster boy grew out his hair, experimented with psychedelics, and surrounded himself with fellow mavericks. In fact, he kept company with an impressive list of friends. Longtime pal Dennis Hopper, whom he'd known since the 50s, was now making avant-garde films and pushing every boundary. Stockwell joined Hopper's circle of like-minded rebels. He became close with musician Neil Young, befriended actors turned hippies like Russ Tamblyn and Jack Nicholson, and even socialized with rock stars such as Eric Clapton. By his own account, this immersion in the scene was liberating. The 60s allowed me to live my childhood as an adult, Stockwell told the New York Times. That kind of freedom, imagination, and creativity that arose all around was like a childhood to me. For a while, he hardly acted at all, and didn't care. He had quit the profession and was reveling in life, making up for lost time. Even during this self-imposed exile from mainstream Hollywood, Dean couldn't entirely avoid the camera. He took occasional acting gigs in keeping with his new outsider identity. In 1968, he co-starred in Psych Out, a trippy, low-budget film set in San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury, directed by Richard Rush. Stockwell played a self-styled guru called Dave, a cool, detached figure presiding over acid parties, alongside a young Jack Nicholson in one of Nicholson's earliest roles. The role allowed Dean to project a sly charisma quite unlike the earnest youths he played as a kid. He was now the mystical observer, the chilly, observant outsider of the psychedelic scene. Not long after, his old friend Dennis Hopper gave him a memorable part in 1971's The Last Movie, Hopper's experimental follow-up to Easy Rider. Stockwell played a menacingly surreal Billy the Kid in that notorious hallucinatory film, which was shot on location in Peru, a wild time that Stockwell later fondly recalled. These forays into counterculture cinema, however, did little to re-establish a stable career. If anything, they underscored how far off the Hollywood radar Dean had drifted. By the early 1970s, he was viewed as an aging former child star with a bohemian streak, a talented but unpredictable figure who had walked away one time too many. Prestigious offers evaporated. Dean himself later admitted that when he finally wanted to resume some serious acting work in the 70s, all the doors were closed. His once bright star had dimmed in his absence. A new generation of actors had taken the spotlight. Stockwell had become, as he put it, more of an outsider than ever upon returning to the business. What followed was a difficult, lost decade for Dean. He pieced together a living with whatever roles he could find, often in B-movies and episodic television. There were strange, largely forgettable films, the lurid Lovecraft world of the Dunwich Horror, or the satirical The Werewolf of Washington, which did little for his reputation beyond cementing him as a cult figure for midnight movie aficionados. At one point, he even took to the dinner theater circuit, performing on small stages for paying diners, which must have felt a long way from Cannes or MGM. Now and then, flashes of the old brilliance appeared. Avid TV viewers might have caught him delivering nuanced guest performances on shows like Columbo or the FBI in the 70s, but these were isolated highlights in a patchy resume. Financially, things got dire. By the start of the 1980s, Dean was so disenchanted and cash-strapped that he made a drastic decision. He quit acting for the third time, and this time he genuinely tried to start a new career entirely outside entertainment. In 1982, the 46-year-old Stockwell relocated to Santa Fe, New Mexico, far from Hollywood's flashbulbs, and earned his real estate license. He intended to live a quiet life selling houses in the desert. He even took out a tongue-in-cheek advertisement in an industry trade paper announcing his services. Dean Stockwell will help you with all your real estate needs in the new center of creative energy, read the ad, listing a Santa Fe phone number. It was as if a chapter had closed. Stockwell later said that around this time he truly believed his acting career was done, and he wasn't alone. His real estate venture came with a little fanfare, and the question occasionally rose in Hollywood: what happened to that kid Stockwell? No one had an answer, and some simply shrugged and assumed he had been washed away in the counterculture years, drifted and perhaps even died. The rumor spread around here and there, quietly whispered. When Lynch arrived in Hollywood after his spectacular success with The Elephant Man, he too heard the tale. Oh, Dean Stockwell, I think he died. And that was that. But in reality, Dean Stockwell's strangest, most triumphant act was still to come. Just when it seemed this mercurial talent had faded into permanent obscurity, fate intervened in a way no one could have scripted. Hollywood, as it turned out, wasn't quite done with Dean Stockwell. And Dean Stockwell wasn't done with Hollywood. In 1984, nearly 2 decades after he had burned his bridges, Stockwell got an unexpected phone call from an old friend. It was Harry Dean Stanton, the craggy-faced character actor who had been part of Stockwell's 60s circle. Stanton had been cast in an offbeat road movie called Paris, Texas, a project by German auteur Wim Wenders with a script by Pulitzer-winning playwright Sam Shepard. Stanton thought Stockwell would be perfect to play his brother in the film. At Stanton's recommendation, Wenders reached out and offered Stockwell the role of Walt, the sensible sibling trying to reconnect with Stanton's drifter character. Stockwell didn't hesitate. After years away, he jumped at the chance to work with artists of this caliber on a film that promised to be something special. Paris, Texas began shooting in the spring of 1984, marking Stockwell's first significant movie in ages. The film would go on to win the Palme d'Or at Cannes, instantly raising Stockwell's profile again. In it, he gave a beautifully restrained performance as the caring yet frustrated Walt, a man attempting to hold together a family splintered by the disappearance and sudden reappearance of his brother. The film is of an extremely rare type, a genuine European auteur left alone to create an artwork in the United States, making use of brilliant and intense Hollywood actors in an American mood and setting without any interference from studios or, as it would be today, focus groups. The result was a masterpiece, one of the most intensely beautiful and powerful films in American independent cinema history, with thrilling performances from Stanton, Stockwell, and their co-stars Hunter Carson and the electric Natasha Kinski. Vendors, a European outsider chronicling the American Southwest, found in Stockwell exactly the alienated outsider quality the role needed. Suddenly, Stockwell was back in front of the kind of audience that had once celebrated him. Meanwhile, that fateful encounter with David Lynch in the Mexican commissary also paid dividends, and with a little good fortune, he was cast as Dr. Yui. Dune was a high-profile project, but Stockwell's part, playing a conflicted doctor who betrays the heroes, was relatively small. But it put him in the orbit of Lynch, one of America's most imaginative directors, and Lynch would soon give Stockwell a far more indelible opportunity. In 1986, Lynch invited Stockwell to play a character named Ben in a mysterious little film noir called Blue Velvet. The role consisted of just one major scene, but what a scene it was. Ben is an exquisitely bizarre presence, a suave lipstick-wearing dandy in a satin smoking jacket, presiding over a decrepit house full of crooks and junkies. In the film's most famously unsettling sequence, Ben stands under a single light bulb and performs a slow, haunting lip sync to Roy Orbison's In Dreams into a handheld work light, as a psychopath named Frank Booth, played by Dennis Hopper, looks on in rapt, drugged ecstasy. The moment is so surreal and riveting that it imprints itself on the viewer's mind forever. Stockwell's performance, equal parts campy and chilling, became instantly iconic, arguably the defining image of Blue Velvet's twisted dreamscape. Furthermore, Lynch confirmed that Ben's singing into the worklight was improvised by Stockwell on set. This was a piece of studio equipment lying at his feet, but Dean saw its uncanny potential and Lynch loved it. Dressed in pancake makeup with an unexplained plaster on his face, batting his lashes with eerie poise, Stockwell made Ben into the bizarre, compelling core of the film. Critic Peter Bradshaw called it, quote, perhaps his masterpiece. Even Hopper, whose demonic turn as Frank Booth dominated the movie, admitted that Stockwell's one scene stole the show. To me, it was the high point of the film, Hopper said later. The white makeup, the batting eyelashes. Dean has ways no other actor can touch. Every choice he made amplified Ben's strangeness and menace. Wanting to out-weird even Dennis Hopper's crazed villain, Stockwell delved into his imagination and came up with inspiration from an unlikely source, comedian Carol Burnett. Burnett had a reoccurring sketch character who was an arrogantly snooty society matron, rolling her eyes half shut in bored disdain. Stockwell stole that trick, adopting half-closed, heavy-lidded eyes that suddenly pop wide open, showing the whites like a shark, he described. He combined it with an unexplained sly smile and that creepy painted face. It was a vivid reminder that Dean Stockwell still had the charisma and boldness to hold the screen in even the wildest circumstances. Stockwell at his best possessed a mercurial presence that made him a chameleon on screen. In Blue Velvet, that mercurial quality was on full display, and a new generation of moviegoers discovered him in one fell swoop. Suddenly, thanks to both Blue Velvet and Paris, Texas, Dean Stockwell was on every cinephile's lips again. The late 1980s became, against all odds, a blaze of glory for Stockwell's resurrected career. Great directors were now keen to use him. Filmmaker Jonathan Demme cast Dean in his offbeat 1988 mob comedy Married to the Mob as Tony the Tiger Russo, a comically over-the-top mafia kingpin with a fondness for gaudy suits and pointy party hats. Stockwell attacked the role with relish, smoking a cigar and gleefully lampooning the stereotype of a gangster honcho. The result was a tour de force of scene-stealing comedy. Critic Sheila O'Malley noted that the performance allowed Dean to be funny, broad, ridiculous, showing yet another facet of his talent. The industry certainly took note. Stockwell earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor for Married to the Mob, his first and only Oscar nod. Some people might poo-poo it and say it didn't mean anything, but it does, Dean said of the honor. It's really gratifying to get recognition from your peers. The Oscar went elsewhere that year, but for Dean, nearly 50 years old and just a few years removed from selling real estate, it was a sweet validation. During the same period, Stockwell picked up roles in a flurry of notable films. In addition to Married to the Mob, he popped up in Tony Scott's big-budget action sequel, Beverly Hills Cop 2, added a touch of sleaze to William Friedkin's fantastic thriller To Live and Die in L.A. as a crooked lawyer, and portrayed Howard Hughes, no less, in Francis Ford Coppola's biographical drama Tucker, The Man in His Dream. He reunited with Coppola again in 1987 for Gardens of Stone, a Vietnam War tale, and a decade later in The Rainmaker, John Grisham's legal thriller, where Stockwell had a memorable turn as a corrupt judge. Filmmakers seemed to recognize that Stockwell could inject a touch of the unexpected into any part, be it a sleazy side character or a figure of authority. As one commentator put it, he was the kind of supporting actor who lent texture and authenticity to a movie, especially for a certain kind of indie American Gothic. By 1988, Dean Stockwell's third career, as he called this renaissance, was in full swing. The reinvention from forgotten ex-child star to hip character actor was so total that few remembered he'd ever been away. One moment in particular symbolized how far he'd come. At the Cannes Film Festival in May 1987, there was Dean, the prodigal son, strolling arm in arm with his new wife, Joy Marchenko, on the croisette. He had actually met Joy, a textiles expert, a few years earlier at Cannes, that very festival which had twice honored him decades prior. They married in 1981, and by the late 80s they had 2 young children together, finally providing the stable family life that perhaps Stockwell had long yearned for. A photograph from 1988 shows Dean, Joy, and their kids Sophia and Austin beaming at a movie premiere in Los Angeles. The one-time Hollywood misfit, now a content family man in a tuxedo. If Dean Stockwell's story ended here, it would already be a remarkable tale of survival and self-discovery. But true to form, he wasn't about to follow the expected trajectory. Just when he had re-established himself in film, Stockwell made a surprising move that left many in Hollywood scratching their heads. In 1989, at the peak of his newfound success, Dean Stockwell did something virtually unheard of for a freshly Oscar-nominated actor. He signed on to star in a network television series. More than a few colleagues thought he had lost his mind. One of his closest friends, Dennis Hopper, bluntly declared, "Well, that's the end of his career," upon hearing the news. Hopper, who had witnessed Stockwell's long struggle back to prominence, feared his buddy was squandering it all on the small screen, then considered a far less prestigious arena than film. In hindsight, however, it turned out that Dean Stockwell's next leap, a quantum leap, if you will, would bring him a kind of fame and fan devotion beyond anything he had ever experienced before. The show was called Quantum Leap, and it would become a cultural phenomenon of the late 80s and early 90s. Created by Donald P. Belisario, Quantum Leap was a genre-blending sci-fi adventure series with a humanitarian heart. Scott Bakula starred as Dr. Sam Beckett, a physicist who involuntarily leaps through time, each episode inhabiting a different person's life in the past to right a wrong or change history for the better. And by Bakula's side, crucially, was Dean Stockwell as Admiral Al Calavici, Sam's best friend, appearing to him as a hologram only he can see, offering wisecracks, guidance, and emotional support. It was a role tailor-made for Stockwell's mix of gravitas and playfulness. Al was world-weary yet boyishly exuberant, a cigar-chomping womanizer in flashy clothes who hid a tender, wounded soul beneath the jokes. Belisario had wanted a distinctive, seasoned actor for the part, and when someone suggested Dean Stockwell, the producer was astonished at his luck. I said. What? Are you kidding me? Dean Stockwell. Belisario remembered of that casting moment, aware that Stockwell was fresh off a high-profile film hit. Quantum Leap premiered on NBC in the spring of 1989. It took a little while to find its audience, but once it did, the show inspired a devoted following. For 5 seasons, viewers tuned in to watch Sam and Al attempt to change people's lives, and occasionally history, for the better. The fantastical premise, time travel with a conscience, was anchored by the very real chemistry between Bakula and Stockwell. On screen, they were a perfect odd couple. Bakula's Sam was earnest, idealistic, often exasperated by his fate, whereas Stockwell's Al was louche, cynical, often more interested in his next cocktail or his wardrobe than the metaphysics of time travel. But as comic as Al could be, Stockwell imbued him with depth. Midway through the series, we learn that Al is a Vietnam vet who spent years as a POW, presumed dead. During that time, the wife he adored remarried, not knowing he was alive. In one poignant episode, Sam actually changes history to reunite Al with that lost love. The moment Al realizes what his friend did for him, Stockwell's face crumpling in grateful shock, is among the show's most moving scenes. Such was Stockwell's ability. Under the neon suits and devil-may-care grin, he could, in an instant, reveal reservoirs of sadness and sincerity. Al Calavicci became one of television's great sidekick characters, largely thanks to the actor's charm. For Stockwell personally, Quantum Leap was a turning point in more ways than one. He found at long last that he was genuinely enjoying acting. He later admitted that the series' 5-year run, 97 episodes from 1989 to 1993, was, quote, very unique in my career, and I'm very, very proud of it. The show's production schedule was rigorous, but it provided stability, something he'd never had for so long in his peripatetic career. And it brought him a new level of popular fame. For the first time, people who might not frequent art house cinemas or remember 1940s films knew the name Dean Stockwell. Quantum Leap earned him 4 Emmy nominations for supporting actor, and in 1990, a Golden Globe Award. The latter he won in person, beaming as he held the trophy aloft. At age 54, Dean Stockwell had become an unlikely TV star. When Quantum Leap was abruptly canceled in 1993, to the enduring outrage of its fanbase, Dean took it in stride. He had finally come to peace with his profession. In interviews, he expressed astonishment and gratitude for his late career gift. After so many stop and starts, he had a body of work he could point to with pride, and he still had more to give. The 1990s saw him continue to balance film and television roles. Robert Altman cast him as part of the absurd Hollywood entourage in The Player, in which Stockwell and Richard E. Grant play a pair of hustling screenwriters pitching a ludicrous movie idea. Dean reunited with Jonathan Demme for a small, intense scene in 2004's The Manchurian Candidate, delivering one close-up that Demme proclaimed among Stockwell's best work. He also recurred on the military drama Jag in the mid-1990s, and guest starred on sci-fi shows like Stargate SG-1 and Star Trek Enterprise in the early 2000s. Fittingly, in 2006, he embraced yet another cult favorite franchise, Battlestar Galactica. In that critically acclaimed reimagining of the space opera, Stockwell played a villainous Cylon leader, known as Brother Cavil, a wry, grandfatherly face concealing an alien menace. Over the show's run from 2006 to 2009, he appeared in many episodes, bringing his regular touch of sly gravitas and surely delighting Quantum Leap fans to see their beloved Al in another sci-fi saga. A whole new generation of younger viewers came to recognize him through Battlestar, proving that Dean's appeal truly spanned eras. If Dean Stockwell had done nothing besides acting, his life would already be one for the books, but in his lost periods he had quietly cultivated other artistic passions as well. He had longtime friendships with creative titans, not only Dennis Hopper and Jack Nicholson, but also musicians like Neil Young, which led to unique collaborations. For instance, back in the early 70s, Stockwell penned an apocalyptic experimental screenplay titled After the Gold Rush. The film was never made, but it inspired Neil Young to write songs for the project. Young's resulting 1970 album After the Gold Rush was indirectly born from Stockwell's imagination. Stockwell also dabbled in visual art throughout his life, especially in the Los Angeles art scene of the 1960s. He produced sculptures, collages, and photographs, some under the name Robert Dean Stockwell to distinguish it from his acting work. In one remarkable instance of art meets history, a photograph Stockwell took of underground artist Wallace Berman ended up on the iconic album cover of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Look closely and you'll find Berman in the collage. He also co-directed and co-wrote an offbeat 1982 indie film Human Highway with Neil Young, a slapstick satire starring both of them, plus a surreal cameo by Devo. And Stockwell even designed an album cover for Neil Young. He created the cover art for Young's 1977 album, American Stars and Bars. After 7 decades of performance and an almost Zelig-like presence in key moments of Hollywood history, Dean Stockwell quietly retired from acting in 2015. He suffered a stroke that year and decided to step away from public life at age 79. By then, he had amassed a staggering 200-plus film and television credits, and perhaps most importantly to him, had finally earned the right to rest. He spent his final years enjoying family and reflecting on an extraordinary journey. On November 7, 2021, Dean Stockwell died peacefully at home of natural causes at the age of 85. According to his family, he was in New Zealand, where his daughter lived at the time of his passing. News of his death prompted an outpouring of tributes from co-stars, friends, and fans across generations. Scott Bakula, who had become like a second son to Stockwell during Quantum Leap, wrote, "He made me a better human being. I loved him dearly and was honored to know him." Others marveled at the length and breadth of Stockwell's career. Dean spent a lifetime zigzagging between the mainstream and the margins, wrote one remembrance, truly a one-of-a-kind path. Stockwell is survived by his 2 children, Austin and Sophia, from his second marriage to Joe Marchenko. His first marriage to Millie Perkins produced no children and ended in the 1960s. In the end, the arc of his personal life was far more stable than one might have predicted during his wild younger days. He was a devoted father and a beloved friend. Those who knew him off-screen often commented on the contrast between his mystique as an actor and his demeanor as a person. Despite the eccentric characters he excelled at playing, in real life Stockwell was remembered as a gentle, kind soul. A costume designer on Quantum Leap recalled how he expected a diva, but found a humble collaborator instead. Throughout the 5 years I designed the series, Dean proved to be the most professional actor I ever worked with, as cooperative, kind, considerate, sincere, and appreciative. That unpretentious warmth may explain why he maintained close friendships over decades, surviving the often fickle nature of showbiz relationships. Here was a man who danced with Gene Kelly, held his own opposite Errol Flynn, and traded lines with Orson Welles while still a boy, who then dropped out and tuned in with the counterculture, hanging with Hendrix and Nicholson, who re-emerged as a villainous fixture in Reagan-era genre films, and the surreal muse of David Lynch, who finally became a beloved TV icon to millions, and even a figure of admiration in sci-fi convention halls in his twilight years. How to sum up such a variegated life? Perhaps the through line is that Stockwell persisted as himself, unapologetically. "One of my priorities is survival," Stockwell said in the 1980s, not long after his big comeback. Survive he did, on his own terms, and to survive sometimes you need to be 2 things at once, even in 2 places at the same time. Obscure and celebrated, respected and humble, in other words, to be quantum. That's about all for this one. Dean is part of my ongoing and pretty loose series on actors who are associated with David Lynch in some way. You can find all the episodes so far in a playlist on the channel homepage. Let me know in a comment if there are any other actors Lynch worked with that you'd like to see a video on, and also let me know which part of Dean Stockwell's career you remember best. Anyway, be sure to make a visit to the Hollywood Mystery Store to check out all the shirts. I think the new batch of designs are pretty cool, and they've been selling like hotcakes, so I want to thank all of you who have made a purchase so far. Until next time, sweet dreams.